12 Years Across Borders. A memoir by Ch.9, Chapter 9. The half year the world stopped. The first sign came in November of 2019, and I missed it. A man I knew in Fukuoka, a pharmaceutical trader, flew to China on business and did not come back. He caught what everyone called a bad cold, ended up in a hospital somewhere on the mainland, and died there. The news filtered through our circle in the way small business news always does, over dinner. Over Lemmies, the messaging app that runs most of social and business life in Japan, the way WhatsApp runs much of Europe. People said the obvious things. How does a man die of a cold? Did he have something underlying? Chinese hospitals, who knows? We sighed. We moved on. I did not connect it to anything. Nobody I knew did. It was not until the following spring, when I was sitting in my office in Hakata with my bank balance walking towards zero, that I remembered the trader and understood I had watched the first domino fall without knowing it was a domino. In January, the word started appearing in the Japanese papers. Wuhan pneumonia. I read it the way most people read it that month. I was not quite old enough to have a sharp memory of SARS in 2003. I remembered the heaping hospital story from Taiwan and not much else. The phrase arrived and I filed it away and kept working. They'll contain it, like SARS. It is one of the most optimistic misjudgments I have ever made, and I made it in about 4 seconds. By early February, the bookings began to unravel. Patients who had flights for the following month called to cancel. Families who had already signed month-to-month leases on Fukuoka apartments wrote to say they could not come. A man in Shanghai who had been preparing for 2 years to bring his wife to Kyushu for treatment sent me a single WeChat message. 3 sentences long apologizing. And planes were stopping, visa was stuck. The border was being discussed in the language of closure. My revenue pipeline had been thin before. Now it was gone. Fukuoka itself had not caught up yet. On my way to the office, the Hakata crowds looked the way they had always looked. The Yedai, the open-air food stalls along the riverbank, were full on weekend nights. The izakaya near my building was turning tables. The subway at rush hour still pressed people into the doors. If you judged Japan by the street, nothing was wrong. The Japanese doctors I worked with sounded the same way. I called 4 of them in the first week of February to ask how they were thinking about the news, and the answers came back almost identical. Probably like a flu, it'll pass. Nothing serious will happen in Japan. China's a special case. Their system is different from ours. These were men whose judgment I had relied on for years. Careful readers of evidence. The kind of physicians who would not sign off on a treatment plan without checking a response rate twice. And every one of them that month told me the same comforting thing. At home, my wife, pregnant with our first child, would look at me frowning over my phone and say, "Hang in there a little longer. It'll pass." I believed her too. We all misjudged it together. I should explain the network that pulled me into what came next. I have been for years a member of the Asian Taiwanese Merchants Association, a loose federation of Taiwanese business people scattered across Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, chapters in every major city with a Taiwanese diaspora. The membership is less glamorous than it sounds. When you actually sit down at these dinners, the people across the table are running hardware stores, textile mills, small food factories. Machinery distributorships, import-export outfits, restaurants, old school trades. The IT people and the finance people are a minority. Nobody at these tables talks about valuations or funding rounds. They talk about exchange rates, customs clearance, factory deliveries, supply chains. The atmosphere is, to borrow a word the older members like, solid. The moment COVID arrived, the network lit up. A number of members already ran medical, supplied trading lines. Others converted overnight. A machinery trader I knew in Vietnam pivoted his factory to making masks. A small logistics company in Jakarta started brokering alcohol and gloves. The association's Lion group, our WeChat group, our WhatsApp group, each carried dozens of messages a day. Got a KF94 sauce in Vietnam. Who wants in? Turkey Sai has an N95 line. DM me. Jakarta prices dropped 20% today. Heads up. I was in these groups. I was reading these messages. If I had paid more attention to them and less attention to the voice on the other end of the line that I was about to hear, the next 6 weeks of my life would have looked different. But I wanted a fast answer. I was not listening carefully enough to the steady voices. I was listening for the loud one. My younger classmate called me one afternoon in early February. Lin Sen, there's someone I want you to meet. A friend of my girlfriend's. The someone was a man I will call J. Korean based in Tokyo and import-export under 30. I had already met him once in 2019 over coffee in Shibuya to talk about cross-border trade. He was young, quick, confident, the kind of operator who seemed to know people everywhere and was not shy about telling you so. He says he has a masked channel, my classmate said. You're the cross-border guy, I want to talk. In February of 2020, the phrase masked channel sounded the way gold channel would have sounded a year earlier. The pharmacies in Fukuoka were empty by opening bell. Ordinary people were tying cloth over their faces. Hospitals were rationing. My own patient business was dead. I had not drawn a personal paycheck in weeks, and my company was burning roughly $1 million a month, about $9,000 at the exchange rates of the time. In fixed payroll and rent, I said yes. I said yes in the tone of a man who has not slept well in a while. What followed was 6 weeks of something I now recognize as a specific category of experience, which is the experience of a tired person being moved through a sequence of small decisions by someone who knows exactly which ones to ask for and when. Jay did not open with the product. He opened with the relationship. Lin Sen, what we Koreans value in business is the trust relationship. I won't deceive you and you won't deceive me, and together we'll make this work. This opportunity isn't something anyone can get. I'm bringing it to you because I know you've been in cross-border for years and you're reliable. Hearing it now, typed out on a page, the speech is almost embarrassing in its transparency. Hearing it then, in late February, 2 months into zero revenue with a pregnant wife at home and a payroll run coming up, I heard it the way a man hears what he needs to hear. We communicated across 3 messaging apps at once, Lee for Jay and me. WeChat for the mainland Chinese middleman he was working through. Telegram for the Turkish side, because that was what the contacts in Turkey used. The notifications on my phone stacked on top of each other through the day and increasingly through the night. Tens of messages a day became dozens. Dozens became hundreds. Jay began flying, first to Tokyo to meet suppliers. Then, suddenly, he told me he was going to Turkey. Lin Sen, I'm on a plane to Istanbul. Lin Sen, I'm on a street in Istanbul now. Look at this. A short video, 20 seconds of a production line. A white conveyor belt with masks cascading off the end of it like something out of a corporate promotional reel. Lin Sen, there's also medicine here. Anything you'd want for your medical business. He would drop these every 2 hours at all hours. I watched the videos on my phone, in bed, at my kitchen table, in the Fukuoka office after everyone else had gone home. They were vivid. They were specific. They looked, I told myself, real. It took me weeks to realize that any of these clips could have been pulled from a Google search for mask factory and rebranded. At the time, I could not imagine someone going to that amount of trouble. At the time, I also could not think clearly because I had not slept a full night in a month. Turkey is 6 hours behind Japan, which meant that when Jay's factory visits happened in the Turkish workday, the messages arrived in Fukuoka after midnight. Lin Sen, I'm at the plant now. Look at this photo. Wire the funds tonight. I can lock this batch for you. I will get out of bed, open the laptop, switch between the 3 apps, confirm a spec on E, confirm a bank account on WeChat, cross-check a product code on Telegram, send a message, wait, send another. And the next morning I had to be back at my desk at 8 to handle the Japanese side of whatever life I still had in Fukuoka. The first week I held up. By the second week I could not get out of bed at a normal hour. By the third I had a constant dull headache and could not hold a thought for longer than a minute. By the fourth I was reading his messages and no longer able to tell which of them were true and which were not. I've come to understand the designed state. A scam of this kind is not a test of intelligence. It is a test of sleep. If you deprive a reasonably competent person of sleep for 28 days and then present him with a decision every 4 hours, the decisions he makes are not the decisions he would have made rested. That is the whole mechanism. You do not need to be stupid to lose your money. You only need to be tired. I was very tired. The story has another character. I will call him H. A Hong Kong trader J had brought in on his side of the deal. Apparently H flew to Istanbul with J, and the two of them walked the Turkish factories together. I say apparently because I never met H, never spoke to him directly, never had his number. Everything I knew about him came through J. In Istanbul, according to J, the two of them ran into an unglamorous obstacle. They could not find a translator who spoke English, Turkish, and Chinese all at once. They cycled through interpreters day by day, quality falling, price rising. They hired one for a morning. They switched to another by afternoon. They burn money on translators the way men in a panic burn it, on anything they hope will fix a problem that is not actually a translation problem. My phone kept filling up. Lin Sen, another translator today. The last one was no good. Lin Sen, bring cash. Everything here is cash. Lin Sen, these manufacturers want us to commit by tomorrow. I had at this point sent tens of thousands of RMBs, tens of thousands of US dollars in escalating tranches through Jay's accounts. He would convert it, hand cash to H, H would hand cash to translators, and translators would pay the factory. Layer after layer. No paperwork. No receipts that would mean anything in court. Only the trust relationship. Then one day the whole line went dark. Lin Sen, J. Ro, I have some very bad news. H has died in Turkey. What? He got very sick here, a bad flu. It went to his lungs. By the time they got him to a hospital, it was too late. We just heard. What about the money? What about the goods? The money is gone. H is gone. The Turkish contacts have vanished. There's no one for me to chase. Lin said, there's nothing to be done. I sat in my office holding the phone. I did not know, and I still do not know, whether any part of this story was true. Was H a real person? Did he die? Was he a character J had used for 4 weeks to move my money out of Japan? I had no way to verify any of it. I had never held H's phone number. I had no contact in Turkey. I could not even confirm that the factory videos had been filmed by anyone I had ever spoken to. What I knew was that the money was gone. Tens of thousands of dollars, gone as cleanly as water down a drain in a country I had never been to, through the hands of a man I had met once for coffee, and another I'd never met at all. For a long time afterward, when I heard the phrase trust relationship in a business meeting, my skin went cold. In early March, I flew to Jakarta, not entirely for masts. I had been a member of the Indonesian chapter of the Merchants Association for years, and I had friends and contacts there I had been meaning to see. The mask question was an extra line on the agenda, not the headline. I told myself I was going to evaluate the market in person. I was also, if I am being honest, going because I could not stand to sit in Fukuoka another week watching our bank balance slide towards zero. The empty airports are what I remember. Fukuoka to Singapore, Singapore to Jakarta. Every leg of the flight mostly empty. Singapore Airlines was selling seats so cheaply it felt like a clerical error. On one of the legs I had an entire 3-seat row to myself. I could have lain down to sleep. In February of 2019 that aircraft would have been full. In March of 2020 it was a shell of itself, carrying maybe 40 passengers and the sound of the engines. In Jakarta, a factory-side friend picked me up at the airport. He asked if I wanted to see the mosque market. Sure, I said. Show me. He did not take me to a pharmaceutical wholesale center. He took me to an open-air market. I still see the scene cleanly. Stalls selling live birds. Stalls selling fruit. Stalls selling household goods. And in one corner, almost incidentally, a cluster of stalls selling surgical masks. No packaging. No branding. No display. Cardboard cartons stacked on the concrete, flaps open, the product visible to anyone who walked by. I asked the price. A 50-piece box of standard surgical masks was selling that day for about 2,000, around 18 at the exchange rates of the time. By 2026, the same box retails for roughly 400 or 500, a fourfold drop. And even the Jakarta street tea price in March 2020 was only the asking price at the stall. If you factored in shipping to Japan, customs, the layers of middlemen, the margin on the trade was already gone. You could buy the masks, freight them, clear them, and be underwater on arrival. My friend watched me do the math on a piece of paper and shook his head. Lin Sen, he said every stall has stock. You see what that means? I did. Stock on every stall is the market telling you it has peaked. When every seller has inventory, it means buyers have already stopped coming. The price is high, yes, but the demand side is frozen. A stall full of product at a high price is not an opportunity. It is a warning. I walked back to the hotel. That night I sat at the window of my Jakarta room, the humidity pressing against the glass, the particular dusty warmth of tropical cities in the air. And for the first time I understood clearly what I had been avoiding understanding for 6 weeks. This was not a short storm. If Jakarta, the largest open market in Southeast Asia, was already saturated in March, then the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year were going to be something none of us had experience with. The world was going to stop for a while. My business, which depended on people moving across borders, was going to stop with it. I flew home without buying anything. I gave up on the mask line. Giving up did not produce income. Through March and into April, I sat in the office and ran the math on adjacent ideas. Protective gowns, medical device brokerage, alcohol distribution. Each time I worked through the numbers, I found the same shape. Prices had gone vertical for 2 months and were about to collapse. The people buying at the top in February were going to be holding warehouses of unsellable inventory by June. Friends of mine, members of the Merchants Network, were already living that story. One man had imported several million yen's worth of hand alcohol. Another had thousands of cases of masks. Another had a container of protective gowns. By the second quarter, those goods were dead weight. I lost less than they did. I did not lose nothing. The Vietnamese mask sale is worth its own sentence. A pharmacy in Tokyo placed orders with me 3 times, smoothly. I sourced from a factory in Vietnam. They paid on delivery. I shipped, the money cleared. 3 clean transactions. For the 4th, they changed the terms. Lin Sen, can you ship first this time? I'll wire the money afterward. You've seen 3 good rounds. You can trust us. I hesitated. I thought about the 3 good rounds. I said yes. I paid the Vietnamese factory. The factory shipped to me in Fukuoka. I reshipped to Tokyo. I fronted the cost of the whole chain. The pharmacy disappeared. Phone disconnected. Email bouncing. The address, when I checked it, was a shuttered storefront. The business, whatever it had been, was gone. Lost roughly 300,000, about 12,700 at the time. Not catastrophic. In early 2020, every 210,000 had the weight of a paycheck. I want to be careful about what this was and was not. It was not a scam in the criminal sense. No fake identity, no elaborate setup, no staged performance over weeks to move my money out of Japan. It was a real pharmacy, a real business, 3 real transactions. On the 4th one, after the goods had landed in Japan, they simply stopped paying and stopped answering the phone. Ordered, received, walked away. In some ways that is worse than a scam. With a scam you can at least file a police report. With this, the goods had already cleared customs and were sitting in a warehouse in Tokyo that was no longer open for business. And there was no one on the other end of any line to pursue. Landed inventory, nobody to pay for it, a sunk cost you eat. What I learned from was a sentence I now say to anyone starting out in cross-border trade. During a crisis, 3 smooth rounds in a row is not a promise of a 4th. A pandemic pushes ordinary businesses, not just con artists, into situations where they quietly stop showing up. I stopped running any kind of PPE trade after that. On April 7, 2020, the Japanese government declared a state of emergency. The city finally caught up with what had already happened. Hitoku Madara, Hyakuji, Shijishi, the streets emptied, every trade shut down. That is the old 4-character phrase, and I wrote it in my 9 notebook that week because nothing else fit. Hakata station's daily foot traffic dropped from well over 100,000 to a few thousand. Most of the storefronts in Tenjin went dark. The river yatai folded away. On every izakaya door there was a small printed notice temporarily closed. A city of 1.5 million acting as though someone had pressed mute. The macro numbers, which I read later, were in the territory of war. US GDP fell by an annualized rate of roughly 30% that quarter. Japan's contracted by about 20%. Numbers like that in peacetime do not exist. You get them from earthquakes, financial collapses, and wars. The Abe government announced a one-time 100,000 payment to every resident. That is about 9:30. The application process worked. A month or so after I filed, the money appeared in our account. My wife and I both received it. For a small company, 100,000 per person is a grace note, not a rescue. My monthly fixed burn salaries, office rent, social insurance, utilities, software sat about 1 million. The 100,000 per adult was a tenth of 1 month. Japan also had a labor protection rule that was well intended and for small operators brutal. If you sent your staff home because there was no work, you were still required to pay at least 60% of their salary. I understood the logic. It kept the unemployment figures from collapsing and saved many families. It also meant that a founder like me, with no revenue, was legally obligated to pay people for not working while writing checks that would soon run out. I sat at my desk that April and did the cold math. How many months can I burn? Not many. If the pandemic ran longer than 6 months, which by then seemed certain, the company would be finished. Through April and May, a strange kind of listing began to flood the Fukuoka rental boards in Yukinuki-Bucken. Storefronts offered with all the previous tenants' fixtures in place, turnkey, walk in and open. In Japanese commercial leasing, the default rule is sukulten mo madoshi. When you leave, you strip the space back to the bare shell. Floors stripped, walls scraped, wiring pulled, back to empty concrete. The restoration cost alone can run several million yen. So in normal times, a tenant who wants to exit usually eats the restoration cost and walks. Few landlords let a lease exit tenant to tenant with fixtures intact. COVID broke that convention. Overnight, Inuki listings multiplied. The meaning was legible. Restaurant owners and bar owners across the city, unable to keep paying, were choosing to hand over everything, the interior build out, the kitchen, the bar, the chairs, rather than bleed another month. They were cutting their losses and running. A Nuki wave at that scale is a collective distress signal. I looked at several listings carefully. One was an izakaya near Ohashi Station. Good location, clean build out, full kitchen. The asking key money was about E2 million, somewhere around E18 down to the rate that year. I ran the numbers seriously. A restaurant, whatever else it was, had daily cash flow. People had to eat. My cross-border medical business had 0 customers and no idea when customers would return. Maybe I should pivot. Maybe I should put on an apron. I contacted the landlord, Linsen. The reply came back polite and final. We do not lease this property to foreigners. No negotiation. No conditional language. No, we'd need additional guarantors. No softening, just the sentence. I contacted a second property, same answer. Third, same. Certain Japanese landlords, older, conservative, holding multiple units in the same district, do not rent to foreigners. Period. There is no appeal. They do not meet you. They do not explain. They simply decline. I spent a few weeks on it. I was turned down 5 or 6 times. Then I stopped. I had lived in Japan for a decade at that point. I spoke the language. I paid my taxes. I had registered my own company. And until that spring, I had mostly not bumped into the wall. You can live in Japan for years and not bump into the wall. In ordinary weather, the wall is not where you are trying to go. But in a crisis, when you need the society to flex with you a little, the wall is very solid. It does not move because of your Japanese, your tax record, or your years in the country. It is simply there, clean as glass, exactly where it has always been, which is between you and whatever you were reaching for. By early summer of 2020, the balance in the company account was effectively zero. I do not mean feeling of zero, I mean the digit. The Japanese government had opened emergency COVID loan programs with low interest, light documentation, and fast approval. I applied and the money came through. For a few weeks, seeing the deposit land, I felt something that resembled relief. The relief lasted about as long as the loan took to drain. Loans are money, but so are salaries, so is rent, so is electricity, so is the software bill. The 1 million per month burn did not pause because the source of the money had changed. Over the course of that year, tens of millions of yens, the equivalent of several $100,000, moved through the company account and out the other side. I watched it go. Late at night, I would sit at my desk with the numbers in front of me, and a question would cycle through my head. What was the point of everything I've built? 10 years of relationships with Japanese hospitals. 10 years of medical document translation that only a few people in Kyushu could do. 10 years of a little black book with direct lines into oncology departments. The whole quiet inventory of what a small cross border medical firm actually runs on. All of it in 2020 worth nothing. Not because the capability had gone bad. Because the market it served had evaporated. No customers could fly. No customers could get visas. No customers existed as customers. Skill without a market is a strange kind of loneliness. It is worse than simple poverty. Poverty you can work yourself out of. Skill without a market makes you feel like the world has quietly rewritten itself while you are not looking, and all your effort has been reassigned to the past tense. I was not sleeping. I came home late, poured a whiskey, poured another, sometimes a third, and hoped alcohol would be heavy enough to hit me. The next morning at 8, I was back at the laptop, writing the apologies. Sorry, this month we still can't fly you in. The reassurances to employees, your salary will still be paid. The pleading notes to the landlord, could we have 1 more month? 4 months of this. My wife pregnant, watched it. One evening, no special dinner, nothing unusual. The plates still on the table, neither of us having moved to clear them. She looked at me and said, should we pack it in? Go back to Taiwan. It was not a threat. It was not a proposal. It was not a complaint. It was worry. She had been watching me stop sleeping, watching me drink, watching the account shrink, watching my face. She did not say the harder version of the question, which was, can we actually get through this? But I could feel it underneath the one she did say. I did not answer. Not because I did not want to. Because sitting there with my fork still on the plate, I did not know how. Taiwan. I had not worked in Taiwan since I was 22. I had no client base there. I had no company there. My entire professional life was a Japanese language life with Chinese language clients, all of which required Japan to be the ground I stood on. Keep going. Keep going on what? The account was almost empty. The pandemic had no end date. The industry I knew had no visible path back. Something else. I had been refused by 5 landlords. I did not know another industry. Every answer I ran came back to I cannot say yes to this. I sat at the table in silence. She did not press. After a while she got up, cleared the dishes, did the washing, and went to bed. Between us that night there was an air that did not have a word, a heavy thing you could not name. I have thought many times since then about why I did not answer. I think the honest word is gambler's delay. A gambler at the bottom of a losing streak knows he should walk away from the table. He also cannot quite do it. He tells himself one more hand, maybe this one turns. There is rarely a real reason. There is rarely a specific plan. There is only refusal to say the sentence I lost out loud. I was a middle-aged man with a pregnant wife and a dying company, and I was stalling. What I can say, from the vantage of several years later, is that stalling turned out to be the correct move, not because of virtue. Because something about to start fermenting in my life that had nothing to do with patients returning, nothing to do with a bailout, nothing to do with a government program, a technical thing, a new tool. I did not know it yet. It was closed though. That is a story for the next chapter. One evening that summer I sat at the office window as the light was going. The street below was almost empty. The sky above the buildings had gone a faint orange. A breeze moved the tops of the trees along the sidewalk the way a hand lifts a curtain. I sat there without a phone in my hand, which was in itself unusual. A thought came up that I had not invited. If my life ended here, it wouldn't be so bad. Not a suicidal thought. I want to be clear about that. It was something else. It was the tired, private peace of a man who has fought for a long time and for an hour is going to stop pretending he still has the energy to fight. The kind of peace that is actually exhaustion, finally willing to sit down. And then, as I was holding that thought, other thoughts arrived unbidden. My wife, though. The things the company learned in Hangzhou, somewhere useful. The old patient still out there on the other side of the border waiting. Mr. T, Miss X's father. Name still in my head. I haven't earned the right to quit yet. I did not stand up and make a speech. I did not write anything down. I did not call anyone. I sat by the window for about an hour while the light finished changing, and then I went back to my desk and opened the laptop and kept working. But something had shifted by a small real degree. I was not deciding to win. I did not think I could win. Winning was not a promise I could make to the room. What I could do was keep going a little longer. That was the promise I made that evening, not a promise of outcome, a promise of presence. Those are not the same promise, and the difference, it turns out, is the whole book. Keep going a little longer. In practice, that meant doing anything. The rest of 2020 and in 2021, I tried a line of small businesses I can only describe, looking back, as the portfolio of a man refusing to sit still. Each of them is a small story. I will list them briefly because they are not glamorous, but they are true. Japanese rice back to Taiwan. A Taiwanese rice trader found me and asked me to source varieties from across Japan. I called mills from Hokkaido to Okinawa Natsuboshi, Koshikari, Akita Komachi, a Kyushu variety called Yumpirika. I built spreadsheets comparing price, grain quality, and shipping cost, At that time, the wholesale price of Japanese rice was under 200 per kilogram, about 1.80. By 2006, the same kilogram sells for 800 of vowels, and I did not at the time understand what I was looking at. I shipped rice to Taiwan for a modest margin and told myself it was enough. When I sealed a pallet for Taipei, I sometimes thought about my grandfather. Shinihao, the name on my Japanese company registration, had been his rice shop 70 years earlier in Taiwan. A small loop closing quietly in the worst year of my working life. Japanese rice seeds to Taiwan. The rice trade taught me that Taiwanese farmers wanted to grow Japanese varieties on Taiwanese land. Seeds are not freely exportable, they move only through regulated channels. I spent 6 months on the paperwork and finally established a legal import line. We ran it for several seasons. Then we hit a problem I could not have anticipated from a textbook. Japanese varieties planted in Taiwanese paddies drift. Cross-pollination with adjacent Taiwanese varieties changes the grain after a few generations. The taste goes. The only way to maintain purity is to re-import fresh Japanese seed every cycle. I learned this by eating the rice from year 3 and thinking this is not what it should taste like. Taiwanese sent to Japan, which failed. I commissioned a Taiwanese distillery to produce a Ch.9, Japanese distilled spirit traditionally from sweet potato or barley for the Japanese market. The logic seemed clean. Japanese consumers love Ch.9. Taiwanese distilleries are skilled and cheaper. I placed the product in Taiwanese goods stores in Japan and on Japanese e-commerce sites. It sold almost nothing. Japanese drinkers of Ch.9 have loyalties to Kyushu Sweet Potato Ch.9, to Kagoshima distilleries, to brand histories they have been drinking since their fathers drank them. A Taiwanese label, however well made, registered as not right, and not right was enough to kill it. I closed the line at a loss. What I learned out, cross-cultural food products are hard, and cross-cultural alcohol is almost impossible. Craft beer with a Taiwanese metal band. After the Shichi failure, I tried craft beer. Taiwanese craft beer was enjoying a moment. I partnered with the Taiwanese band Stonic on an independent label. The design was beautiful. The narrative was strong. A Taiwanese brewery produced the liquid. Then I discovered too late that beer has a 1-year shelf life. I had assumed, without examining the assumption, that alcohol ages well across the board, the way whiskey does. Beer does not. Unsold beer after a year is not beer anymore. Our logistics were not fast enough. Our sell-through was not aggressive enough, and each batch that aged past its window had to be written off. We closed that line too. Sunflower. The last of these small ventures is worth naming, because the name is the point. We worked with a Japanese distillery, bought their liquor, and applied our own label. The label reads Sunflowers Taiwanhua. The reference for Taiwanese readers is the Sunflower Movement, the 2014 student occupation of Taiwan's parliament over a services trade pact with China. I had stood on the wrong side of that movement in my own head for years. I had gone on to work in China, inside the J Group Tower in Hangzhou, drinking baijiu with people whose politics I did not share, and whose money I took. By 22 I was 37. I was not going to sit outside a parliament all night anymore. But I wanted to put that younger self somewhere on a shelf, in a bottle, so that the memory would have a physical form. The product did not sell in any serious volume. That was not really the point of it. The label existed. That was the point of it. None of these businesses are running today. Rice, seeds, shirkat, craft beer, sunflower. I close them one by one over the next 2 years. What they were at the time was the material content of the sentence, keep going a little longer, not an abstract resolve. An actual set of phone calls, shipments, invoices, and failures. Most of them lost money. All of them taught me something specific about a world I had not touched before. A man corner does strange things. The point is not which of them worked. The point is that he kept moving. That was how I got through COVID. The sun went down a little earlier the next evening. The office was quiet. On the windowsill behind my laptop, a half-finished cup of coffee had cooled. The phone on the desk was silent for once. Outside, a single cyclist on the streetlight, and the street was empty again. Author's note: the patient stories referenced in passing here are discussed at length in earlier chapters. Nothing in this chapter constitutes medical advice. All business partners outside the public record have been given alphabetic pseudonyms. That is the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.